Blood in the Water by Miles to Go. A Batman, all media types, Red Robin, and Red Hood and the Outlaws fanfic, rated for mature audiences, with additional tags for Wumptober 2025, Wump, Hurt Comfort, Creepy Ra's al Ghul, One-Sided Tim Drake Ra's al Ghul, Tim Drake and Jason Todd are siblings, Protective Jason Todd has the All Blades, as he should, Lazarus Pit, DCU, Disassociation, Flashbacks, Self-Sacrificing Tim Drake, Self-Sacrificing Jason Todd, Captivity, Cage Fights, Sort of, Magic, Magical Tattoos, Betrayal, Implied/referenced Dubious Consent, Implied/referenced Rape Non-Con, Tim Drake is Not Okay, Hurt Jason Todd, and POV Jason Todd. Summary. Roz smiled. It was slimy and predatory. Jason was grateful as hell that Damian hadn't inherited it. His self-righteous, puff-headed little smirk was all Bruce. "You know," Roz said, "I haven't anything prepared, Timothy. I do apologize. This has been nothing but a fortuitous happenstance. I had planned on pursuing you again in the future, of course, but I took our meeting at that gathering as an act of fate, and had no choice but to take the opportunity in the moment." He looked at Jason with displeasure. "You, however, were never part of any plan." He rubbed his beard thoughtfully. "What to do with you, Jason Todd?" Tim and Jason are captured by Ra's al Ghul. It does not go well for either of them. Trigger warnings. Implied/referenced non-con. The R-word is explicitly used in the epilogue, if that's a concern for you. Nothing happens on screen, or is ever officially confirmed. Chapter 1. The tiles were cold beneath Jason's bare feet, which seemed odd to him since they were in the scorching desert. The compound must have used some natural cooling. Mountain springs or some bullshit. Probably just solar-powered air conditioning. Who the fuck knows? Why was he thinking about that now? Tim sat cross-legged on the bed, quietly watching Jason pace. Like Jason, he was shoeless and sockless. They were in civilian clothes, but they'd been stripped of anything they might use to escape, as well as any concealed weapons and tools they had. They were both in nothing but semi-casual party attire. Jason should probably have been sitting down, seeing as he had been trying to hide his limp from Tim, but if he stayed still, he might explode. Tim narrowed his eyes at the leg Jason was definitely not favoring, but didn't comment. "How the fuck are you so calm?" Jason only barely, didn't literally snarl. His head was pounding. He rubbed gingerly at the lump on the back. Those bastards hadn't held back. He was lucky he didn't have a concussion. Tim didn't look much better. "Isn't this like your worst nightmare or something? He's like your mortal enemy. Immortal enemy. Whatever." "Really trying not to think about that, Jay. But thank you so much for pointing it out." Both of his eyes were starting to blacken from his broken nose. The bleeding had stopped at least, and he cleaned it up as best he could. Jason couldn't see any other visible injuries, but there was no telling what was hidden underneath his clothes. Neither of them had gone down easy, but they had gone down. Tim's answer was completely fair. "Nice one, Jason. Way to be an asshole." Still, it was driving him crazy how serene Tim was acting, when Jason couldn't hide how fucking scared he was of Roz. He hated himself for it. "Sorry, but you're the one sitting there. Why aren't we escaping right now?" "Because it's Roz. You have to learn to play his game. Just trust me, okay?" Jason didn't stop pacing. "Okay, what do you think his plan is?" "I think he's probably still in the plotting stage. He wasn't exactly expecting us to just fall into his lap like this." And goddammit, they had done just that. They'd been undercover at a private party in Dubai, and they'd almost literally just bumped into Ra's al Ghul. He'd looked just as surprised as they had. Needless to say, they hadn't made it out of the party under their own power. "Well, you know him better than anyone." Which wasn't strictly true. Bruce and Damian held that title, but Jason knew Tim had worked closely with Roz at some point. He didn't really know the whole story, but he knew how it ended. He'd seen the scars. "If you were him, what would you do?" Tim glared. The first real emotion Jason had seen since this started. "I really resent that." "Resent whatever the fuck you want, as long as it gets us out of here." Any semblance of emotion slid smoothly away, and Tim's face went blank again. Jason could see how forced it was now. As forced as any of Tim's masks ever were, anyway. Quit worrying so much. I can get him to let you go, no problem. Jason spluttered. You really think I'd just leave you here? Don't be stupid, of course you will. Because if you get out of here, you can tell the others where I am. As illogical as that sounded in theory, Jason didn't really like that idea. Won't Roz be expecting that? Yes, but he won't be worried about it. His ego is too big. Jason hated how right he was. Roz was the original megalomaniac. Do you know what he wants from you? Again, Jason didn't know the whole story behind their relationship. He assumed it was similar to Roz and Bruce's. Tim and Bruce were so alike, it was uncanny, and Roz would see that easily. Tim shrugged a single shoulder, his hands still clasping his crossed ankles. I can think of a lot of things. I'd rather not. Look, if I'm gonna leave you here, as if, I want to know what I'm leaving you to. And how are you gonna convince him to let me go anyway? This idiot was always too ready to sacrifice himself. See, directing an entire fleet of murderous drones at him to save everyone else. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. Just like Bruce, Jason wondered if it was secretly their egos. Roz probably liked that too. Tim closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. Will you stop pacing? You're giving me a headache. Jason didn't stop pacing. You didn't answer the question. And I don't plan on doing so. You... There was a polite knock on the door and Jason froze. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see Tim tense minutely. For all his posturing, Jason could tell the kid was scared, and just putting up an almost flawless facade. The door cracked open and a man peeked into the room. Hello? He said in thickly accented English. I hope I'm not interrupting. He stepped all the way inside and gave a meek smile. His short hair and beard were dark, and he wore a light green thob. I am Fahad. Master Roz has assigned me as your personal escort. I will be serving you for the duration of your visit here. Our visit won't be long. Underling number 1. So you don't need to stick around. Jason sneered. It's Fahad, sir, and Master Roz has instructed me to escort you to his drawing room. Jason snorted. Drawing room? He mocked. What are we, in a Bronte novel? Fahad frowned. I apologize if my English is not correct. What word would you use? Jason opened his mouth and then closed it again. He looked at Tim, who shrugged. Parlor, Tim suggested. He fell easily into the infamous Robin banter, the familiarity easing some of the tension. But then you're getting into historical Southern romance novel territory, and I don't think that's the theme here. Yeah, definitely not a Margaret Mitchell story, Timmy. Jason glared at Fahad. Fine, we'll go with drawing room for now, but only because I don't have a thesaurus handy. Fahad looked a little baffled. I will show you the way now, if you would. On the walk to this supposed drawing room, Jason and Tim decided on sitting room. Jason should have thought of that sooner. The only drawback was that he couldn't think of any literary quips that applied well enough to their particular situation. Give him some time, though. Roz's sitting room was surprisingly plain. The colors warm and muted. The rugs were thick and cushioned under Jason's bare fucking feet, but lacked the intricate designs he would expect. The furniture was still, of course, sturdy and expensive. The chairs high-backed and skillfully crafted. The small round table in the center of the room coated in gold. But the chairs and couches were arranged in a boring configuration. No centralized throne-like chair for Roz. Roz was lounging on one of the couches. He gestured to the opposite couch. Jason and Tim didn't move. Detective, Roz greeted. I hope you are finding your accommodations agreeable. He didn't try to insist that they take a seat. Roz. Tim responded coldly. What can we help you with? Jason was impressed. Tim didn't seem fazed at all, even with his blood-stained face and purpled eyes. Jason hoped he was coming off just as nonchalant, but he was pretty sure he wasn't even close. He was shaking in his imaginary boots. Anything pit adjacent had a tendency to do that to him. What if there was a Lazarus pit here, right underneath their feet? Would he feel it? And the smell of it was always still staining the inside of his nostrils. What if he wasn't just imagining that? He tried to hide the shudder. When in doubt, just look really pissed off. That usually worked for him. Roz smiled. It was slimy and predatory. Jason was grateful as hell that Damian hadn't inherited it. His self-righteous, puff-headed little smirk was all Bruce. "You know," Roz said, "I haven't anything prepared, Timothy. I do apologize. This has been nothing but a fortuitous happenstance. I had planned on pursuing you again in the future, of course. But I took our meeting at that gathering as an act of fate, and had no choice but to take the opportunity in the moment." He looked at Jason with displeasure. "You, however, were never part of any plan." He rubbed his beard thoughtfully. "What to do with you, Jason Todd?" Jason bristled, but when he tried to think of a witty retort, he pulled a blank. He wasn't at his best when he was fucking terrified, okay? "You were quite the entertainment in the fighting pits, as I recall." All other thoughts fled as Jason's body went cold, ice flooding him all the way to his toes, settling the heaviest in his stomach. His ears started ringing. Perhaps we could relegate you to that once again. The feeling of bones crunching beneath his fists, the smell of blood and mud, a mixture of both caking his body. Was it sweat or blood dripping in his eyes? Pain on the back of his thigh, the slash of a sword. He didn't understand what was going on. Why were these people trying to hurt him? He wanted his mom. Where was Bruce? Where was... Barbaric, plebeian form of entertainment, Roz. Jason tuned back into the conversation. His lips and fingers were tingling. Tim had shifted slightly so that he was partially blocking Jason from Roz. "I'd expect something more sophisticated from you than watching people beat each other up." Roz tisked. Damian's little tick sounded gross coming from Roz's mouth. "There is nothing more elegant than watching two warriors in a dance to the death, Timothy. It is an ancient and primal sport. It strips man of his superfluous complexities and pares him down to nothing but instinct and skill. Seeing a man look death in the eyes is seeing his soul." Ew, cliché. You call forcing a 16-year-old to fight for his life elegant? Jason could see the anger radiating off Tim. His facade was cracking. Roz was getting under his skin expertly. "I see you are passionate about this subject." Roz was smirking. He knew exactly what he was doing. "Perhaps you should see it for yourself before passing judgment. As a master of martial arts yourself, I'm sure you will change your mind once you've seen it with your own eyes." Jason's head was starting to go fuzzy, his focus drifting outside of his control. It was taking too much effort to keep his breathing steady. "I will have such an event arranged for tonight. For you, Timothy. I will bring out my two most prized fighters." So not Jason. He wasn't going to force Jason to fight. Not tonight, anyway. His knees went weak with relief, but he kept them locked harder. Roz hummed. "I would like to invite you to dinner, detective. I can think of many subjects on which I would like to pick your brilliant mind. We will attend a fight after." "He's not going anywhere with you alone," Jason said firmly. It was almost impossible to keep his voice from shaking, but he wasn't going to let this happen. "He will be perfectly safe, I assure you." Roz's eyes flashed. "And you might find it prudent, child, to refrain from provoking my ire. The only reason you are not currently being cut open and studied for your resilience to the Lazarus pit effects is because it would upset Timothy. The fighting pits are not out of the question, as I believe you would find that preferable to your death, and would therefore be more agreeable to it as an option. I have not yet decided your fate. Be mindful." "If you do so much as lay a hand on him, I will tear down your entire empire," Tim said. There was that cold Red Robin facade again, clicking easily into place. His voice didn't hold an ounce of inflection. It wasn't a threat, it was just a statement of fact. A slow smile split Roz's face, and an honest-to-God twinkle sparked in his eye. "Playing that game with you would be my great pleasure, detective." They were silent as Fahad led them back to their room, or chambers, as Fahad called it. Jason's head wasn't sitting solidly enough on his shoulders right now to come up with anything for that one either, even though it should have been an easy one. When they were alone again, the door safely closed behind them, Jason collapsed on the edge of the bed. It was Tim's turn to pace. The sound of swords clashing and men crying out was still ringing in Jason's ears. He knew he could hold his own in the fighting pits. He had before already, but that wasn't the point. The smells, the sounds, it would bring back too many memories, and It took too long for him to register the face hovering in front of him and the hands on his shoulders. Tim was crouching down in front of him with concern pinching his features. "Sorry, what?" Jason asked, shaking away the phantom sensations. "I just asked if you were okay, but I got my answer," Tim said, straightening. "Tell me where your head's at." Jason shook his head. "I'm fine. It's fine. I'm good. I can do whatever we need to." His head was actually about 10 inches to the left of where it should be. Tim shifted and dropped down on the bed next to him. "We need to feel things out more before we start thinking up an escape plan. For now, all we can do is kill time." He glanced over at Jason, not subtly. "Plenty of time to talk." Jason scrubbed his face with both hands and allowed himself to be more vulnerable than he wanted to be. "What if there's a Lazarus pit here?" He couldn't keep his voice from shaking anymore. "I don't ever want to be near one again, Tim. I can still remember the smell. Sulfur and sweet, like rot. Wrong. I don't want to fight in the pits. It's pretty clear how just the mention of them is affecting me. I'll freeze up and get myself killed. And..." He took a breath. "Roz scares the shit out of me." "You're not going back into the fight pits, Jason. Or anywhere near the Lazarus pit. Not if Roz wants any ounce of cooperation from me." Jason shook his head numbly. "You heard him. He'll give you an ultimatum. You'll have to choose the lesser of two evils." Tim set his shoulders in determination. "I told you I know how to play his games. There's always a third option with him. I've got this." Jason really wanted to believe that. Jason ignored the plate of food that Fahad had brought him, letting it go cold on the small dining table in their room. Like fuck was he eating any food Ra's al Ghul offered him. The water, unfortunately, he had to risk, but he did his best to run as many improvised field tests on it as he could first. It didn't burn off his skin or kill him after a small sip, anyway. He paced again. Tim had been gone for too long. How long does it take to eat dinner? Jason jumped when the door opened. Tim looked exhausted, every line of his body tense. Jason was on him the second he walked through the door. "What happened?" Tim's distracted gaze wandered to Jason. "Just Roz's usual creepiness." Jason frowned. "You good?" "Not really. I want to get out of here. Give it another day or so, and I think we can start coming up with an actual informed plan. For now, Roz is sending Fahad over with proper attire for tonight's entertainment." He threw an indecipherable look Jason's way. "He wants you there." Bile rose in Jason's throat. "I can't." Tim's face twisted. "Oh, that look was sympathy." "I know. I don't think we have much of a choice. We have to choose our battles right now." Jason took a deep, slow breath to keep himself from spiraling. "Okay," he breathed. "Okay, I said I could do what we needed to do. I guess, fuck." He ran both hands through his hair. He could do this. He could. Jason didn't actually get why the memories of the fighting pits bothered him so much. His whole life had been nothing but fighting. He went from fighting on the streets to fighting in a costume. It never actually stopped. Why should that experience be any different? Roz made sure Tim was wearing a suitable outfit for the night's show. Makeup covered his twin black eyes, and he was dressed in a red Kurdish kaftan, elegant golden flourishes lining the edges of the outer silken robes. The silk shirt was a shining black, adorned with more suitable gold and red flourishes and filigree, and the red harem pants were tucked into soft boots, the same deep red as the robes. A gold medallion bib necklace was draped over his chest, topped with a golden collar that was lined with glittering green gems. The green stood out as somewhat out of place with the color scheme of the outfit, but that was clearly intentional, and freakishly possessive. It made Jason want to gag. Jason's stomach had dropped when he first saw it. He hadn't quite understood how extensive Roz's obsession with his fucking baby brother actually was until then. He hadn't even considered that Roz's interest was like that. He hoped he was reading into it wrong. Like fuck was he just leaving Tim behind? "A bit over the top, isn't it?" Jason asked through gritted teeth, trying to look casual by bumping shoulders with Tim as they walked, and speaking low enough that only the two of them could hear. "Everything is with Roz." Tim responded just as quietly. "This is the first time we're being seen in public together here. He's making a statement. He always gets what he wants." "A statement to his people or to you?" "Both." Jason's outfit was much, much plainer than Tim's. He had been dressed in a similar thob to the one Fahad had been wearing, though it was a higher quality cotton and a creamy white. The center front seam was lined with delicate golden embroidery, and brown leather boots peeked out beneath the bottom hem. It felt nice to have fucking shoes again. He felt oddly vulnerable without them. That had probably been the point. Roz loved his weird mind games. Roz's outfit was the same as usual. Green robes trimmed with golden edges, a bright white shirt beneath it, a golden sash holding up silk green harem pants, and tall black boots. The only difference tonight was the addition of a gaudy lion-skin cloak, the fur from the mane wrapped around his shoulders and held in place by bone clasps. Wasn't he supposed to be some kind of eco-terrorist? Shouldn't killing animals be against the rules or something? When they passed through the tall stone archway that led to the large courtyard, Jason was presented with a familiar scene that made his breath catch in his throat. The fighting pits were just that, large circular pits recessed into the ground of one of the many grand courtyards that were found around the compound, though he supposed it could be considered more of an arena than a courtyard. There are 3 pits of varying sizes. One was littered with various obstacles, another with walls lined with inward-facing spikes, and the last filled with a deep layer of thick muck. The walls of each pit were a dark red stone. Jason remembered the feeling of the rough rock against his bare back, scraping deep abrasions into his skin as he fought against the hold of another warrior. Most of his memories of his time pre-resurrection and pre-pit were muddled and foggy, but the fighting pits were crystal clear in his mind, cracked and broken, though they may be from his confusion at the time. The largest of the 3 was an obstacle pit, measuring maybe 60 or 70 yards in diameter. The smallest was the mud pit, barely larger than a boxing ring. Mud clogged his nose and mouth, choking while trying to dodge the sweep of a sword, sogging through knee-deep muck, not fast enough to block the blow to his abdomen, knocking what little breath he had out of him, coughing and gagging, trying to suck in air. But his vision was tunneling, and he was on his knees waiting for the "No killing blows with this one, Tahir. Lady Talia is keeping him as a pet for the time being." Jay. Tim's hand was on his shoulder, voice low. "I'm fine. Stop." Jason spoke through his teeth again, gritting them hard enough to crack, and brushing Tim's hand off. He breathed deeply through his nose. Fresh air, no mud. He was fine. There were no seats or benches surrounding the pits. Most of the jeering onlookers stood around them, but some of them were fortunate enough to be given the honor of the best view, sitting on the edge, dangling their feet over the side. Weakness was not tolerated among Roz's ranks, not even from the servants, and anyone who was clumsy enough to fall into the pits deserved their fate, and were allowed to be used as sacrifices to the warriors. Human shields, distractions, target practice, whatever their chosen purpose was. Their end was always the same. It was all part of the entertainment. The only actual, comfortable viewing area was a raised, curved stone platform that oversaw all 3 pits. The chair atop the platform couldn't quite be called a throne, but it was just a step beneath one, all shining dark wood, emerald velvet, and bone accents. Jason was almost certain that it was human bone. 2 high-backed wooden chairs, carved with symbols and designs Jason wasn't familiar with, sat abreast each side of the regal seat, his and Tim's. As they ascended the steps on the side of the platform, Jason felt sick. The thought of being on the other side of the pits made his stomach churn. Most of the warriors who fought to the death there were willing participants, but some of them were not, and there was no way of knowing which were which. There was a good chance he would see an innocent person die here tonight. It took all of his willpower not to turn heel and flee. He was dreading the sights and sounds that were to come. Tim didn't touch Jason again, but he still hovered. He was worried, Jason realized, about him. Jason hesitated to sit in his chair, but complied when Tim nudged him with a meaningful look. Jason sat back and did his best to ignore the start of the first fight. Chapter 2. When they returned for the night, Jason locked the door to their ensuite bathroom and vomited violently into the toilet. Tim had the good graces not to knock on the door to check on him. Jason lay his head against the cold porcelain of the toilet, not caring how unhygienic it was. He couldn't stop shaking. It was so stupid. He was better than this. It shouldn't have been bothering him so much. He's been through worse things. Much worse. A lot of worse things. This was nothing but a footnote in his traumatic fucking biography. He just couldn't understand what was happening. All he knew was that he trusted Talia. She'd been the only kind touch he could ever remember in his half-gone memories. He trusted her, yet she put him in this awful place day in and day out, with people who were trying to hurt him. Had he done something wrong? Was he being punished? She'd said it was training, but he didn't know what that meant. His legs were starting to cramp by the time he'd decided he'd wallowed enough, and he hauled himself up off the bathroom floor and went to rinse his mouth from the faucet. When he stepped back into their room, Tim was laying back on the bed, his arms thrown across his eyes. He startled when he heard Jason entering the room, and sat up abruptly, a groggy fogginess clouding his eyes. "You okay?" he asked Jason. "You should probably stop asking that." Jason's voice was rough from puking. "Yeah, you're right. Neither of us are going to be until we get out of here." Jason sank down onto the bed with a tired groan. "Why did he only give us one bed anyway? Weirdo." Tim shrugged. "At least it's big." Jason studied his brother for a long moment. Tim looked bad off enough that Jason almost broke his own newly established rule and asked him if he was okay. He'd definitely been dozing off when Jason had entered the room, which was very unlike him. Tim wasn't one to sleep in enemy territory at all unless he had gone enough days that he had to. He had a distant look in his eyes that was more than just normal tiredness. Even reclining on the bed, his entire body was rigid and tense. "You gonna get out of that ridiculous outfit?" He looked down at himself, like he'd forgotten that he was still covered in silk and jewels. Yeah, I probably should." Jason sighed and slid off the bed. There was a door that he assumed was a closet, and he was proven right when he opened it. There were several outfits hanging in it, and he picked through them until he found something that he thought looked vaguely like sleep clothes. Nothing fancy, just loose cotton pants and a thin, short-sleeved shirt for each of them. He tossed one at Tim and started stripping to put on his own. Tim's fingers were slow and clumsy as he undid the necklace clasps and all the buttons on his shirt. But he managed to disentangle himself from the ridiculous getup. He pulled on the pants and tunic and flopped back sideways onto the bed, legs hanging over the side, staring at the ceiling. "You want to sleep while I take watch?" Tim hummed. "We don't really need to worry about that, I think. If Roz wants to screw with us, he will do it whether we're awake or not." Jason frowned. "You think we're finally getting closer to moving into the planning our escape stage? I already got some ideas." Tim was quiet for a few beats too long. "Yeah." He rubbed his face vigorously. "We can get started on that tomorrow." Jason resisted the urge to sigh. "Okay, kid. What's up with you? You've been weird ever since your little dinner with Roz." Extra weird. Not just kidnapped by his arch-nemesis weird. Tim shook his head without lifting it from the mattress. "I'm just tired. Haven't slept since Dubai." "Yeah, neither have I. And I know for a fact that you can go much longer than me without passing out." "I'm tired, Jason. I don't know what else to tell you," Tim snapped. Jason didn't rise to the bait. "What happened? At your dinner?" "We ate food. Roz monologued, not much else to it." Somehow, Jason doubted that. "Okay," he conceded. "I don't feel great about one of us sleeping without the other keeping an eye out. Get some shut-eye. I can make it another day." Tim didn't even argue. He scooted back onto the bed until he was right way up, and curled up, facing away from Jason. He didn't bother getting under the blanket. Tim was in a slightly better mood the next day. By the time they had gotten back from the previous night's events, it had been pretty late in the night. So when he stirred only a few hours later, it was early morning. Roz had furnished the room with a well-stocked bookshelf, and Jason was lounging on the other side of the bed, reading an English translation of something called the Kalila Wat Dimna, when he heard Tim's breathing change. He glanced over and saw his eyelids fluttering and his eyes shift from confusion to alertness. He shot upright, taking in his unfamiliar surroundings, and relaxed when he noticed Jason. "Morning, Sleeping Beauty," Jason greeted. Tim knuckled his eyes. It was obvious by his pallor that he hadn't gotten nearly enough sleep. "You're still up. You didn't have to do that." Jason shrugged. "Make it up to me by repaying the favor later." Tim nodded. "Sure." Tim went to inspect the bathroom. Jason had gotten a better look at it while Tim was sleeping, and he wasn't busy puking his guts up. It was pretty modern, mostly stone with the lavish fixtures, and warm, recessed lighting. The shower was made of natural-edged, cut rock, with a waterfall stream, a detachable head, and a stone bench in the corner. The toilet and the sink were similar, as little man-made material as possible, like the rest of the compound. It was all very eco-warrior. Not that there was anything wrong with that, intrinsically. Jason just wasn't really down with the whole omnicide thing. He heard the lock on the bathroom door click, and the shower turn on. He breathed a sigh of relief and sank back into the pillows. He'd been half afraid the kid would still be as depressed and lethargic as he'd been last night, and Jason was gonna have to drag him out of bed. And fuck, he was exhausted himself. He almost regretted not sleeping, but he was glad he didn't. Tim may be resigned, but Jason sure as fuck was not going to just roll over without a fight. Tim came out dressed in only his sleep pants and dug through the closet until he found some somewhat modest clothes. Loose, mustard-yellow cotton pants, and a short-sleeved black dashiki, with simple golden markings around the collar and chest-length center seam. Roz, it seemed, had a taste for garb with a variety of different cultures. "Sorry about last night," Tim said. "Roz just messes with my head." "I get it." Tim gestured at the bed. "Take a nap. You're beat. I'd rather get a head start on this escape plan. I'm still putting my thoughts together on it. Give me a while to solidify it a little more. You'll have a clear head once you've slept anyway." Jason didn't have it in him to put up too much of a fight either. Jason hardly knew what day it was when he woke up. There was a fancy brushed bronze clock on the wall, and from what he could tell, from the pretentious, numberless position of the hands, he'd slept for a lot longer than just a few hours. When he blinked tiredly around the room, Tim was nowhere to be seen. It was only seconds before Jason realized what had woken him, the sounds of boots echoing through the outer hallway, approaching the room. A lot of them. Jason tensed and scrambled off the bed, putting it between him and the door. He glanced around for a weapon and found absolutely nothing useful within arm's length. Where the hell was Tim? Had they come to take him and Jason hadn't even woken up for it? The boots reached the door, and they didn't even bother to knock. It swung open, and 6 guards poured into the room. 6 large, heavily armed guards. Jason bared his teeth and shifted his center of gravity. Logically, he knew that he probably couldn't take 6 beefed-up League assassins on his own, unarmed, and it would be best to conserve his energy for whatever was going to come next. But logic was Tim's thing, and he wasn't here to talk Jason down right now. In the end, it didn't matter. They shoved Jason's back flat against the wall, pulling his arms up to his sides, and securing his wrists in leather cuff restraints. The same was done to his legs. His head was spinning from getting it slammed into the floor more than once. Once the assassins had overpowered him, they dragged him down to the lower level of the compound. The memories of this particular part were fuzzy from back then, but he knew he'd been here before. The edges of the room were lined with cells, some of them occupied. The barred doors locked tightly. They were securing Jason to the wall inside one of them. A woman approached him with a knife, and he struggled for all he was worth. But it didn't stop her from taking the knife and snagging the collar of his shirt with the tip of it and ripping downward. She did the same to his pants until he was stripped down to nothing but his boxer briefs. She yanked his shoes off last. They dressed him in tight, knee-length shorts made of some type of thick animal pelt. His feet and chest were left bare. Another woman entered, a bundle of metallic objects gathered in her arms, and as soon as he caught sight of them, Jason started to hyperventilate. He was too frozen to fight it when she attached metal shackles to his wrists, along with the leather ones still chaining him to the wall. She did the same to his ankles, and threaded the chain through loops in all 4 pieces. It was when he felt the collar click shut around his neck that he started to fight anew, jarred out of his frozen panic, out of the conditioned response to the chains coming out. Several large men entered the room at the sound of his shouting, and one of them pressed on his bucking chest, flattening him against the wall again. There wasn't much he could do in this position except try to push against the hands on his chest, but it was no use. The man held his hand out for one end of the chain, and the woman placed it into his palm. He threaded it through the loop in the collar, and that was it. Jason was in chains, again. The feeling of shackles rubbing his wrists raw wasn't just the distant memory of a scared little boy anymore. They were putting him in the fighting pits. He didn't put up any more of a fight as they led him into the arena. He needed to save his energy. He could barely even think. They didn't pass through the same entrance Roz had led them through the night before. Instead, they led him through the doors on the side of the arena. From here, he could see the platform from which they'd viewed the previous night's fights. Oh! Only one chair had been placed next to Roz's tonight. Tim occupied it. He was dressed well, though not nearly as gaudy as the night before. He was in a white tunic with green trimmings, a gold sash wrapped around his waist, and harem pants so dark green they were almost black. A gold collar encircled his throat again, this time with a large emerald set right in the center of it. That looked an awful lot like giving in. Tim's eyes were lowered, the muscles of his jaw tightly clenched. He didn't look up, though Jason knew Tim felt his dumbstruck gaze on him. He'd sold Jason out. He'd really done it. He'd promised that there was always a third option with Roz. "Trust me," he'd said. Jason had tried not to believe that, didn't want to get his hopes up. But the wrenching feeling that was splintering his chest right now told him that he had anyway. Tim didn't have a choice, Jason told himself. Roz must have made more serious threats than either of them had anticipated. And Tim had lied to Jason about it. Probably from the very beginning. Knowing Tim likely didn't have a choice didn't help the feeling of betrayal prickling behind Jason's eyes. The guard frog walked him to the edge of the mud pit. He didn't fight. He'd learned very, very quickly, back then, that never ended well. They led him down a steep set of stairs, and up to the gates that led into the pit. His restraints were unlocked and ripped off of him, and then he was being shoved into the gates and into the mud. He landed on his hands and knees, sinking down a good foot and a half into the thick muck. They threw a long dagger in after him and slammed the gates shut. On the opposite side of the pit, his opponent swaggered confidently through the door. Jason scooped the knife out of the mud, leapt to his feet, and lunged. They hosed him off so he wouldn't leave a mud trail on his way back to their room. They didn't even bother to put him back in chains. Fahad simply arrived at his side and told him that he would escort him back now. He didn't remember a single thing from the walk through the halls to their door, but he found himself back in their room before he knew it. He stumbled to the bathroom and cranked the shower faucet as hot as it would go. He curled up on the floor, under the stream, and didn't even bother taking his clothes off. An evidently endless supply of hot water meant he couldn't tell how long he'd been curled up there, but it felt like a long, long time before Tim was standing over him. Jason hadn't even closed the bathroom door. He didn't lift his head at Tim's voice, didn't acknowledge that he'd heard him. He was too far away from himself to bother. Tim turned the water off and maneuvered him up to the shower's bench seat. Jason went along with it, allowing Tim's nudges and directions. Tim stripped him quickly and efficiently. It didn't bother Jason. He'd never been modest. He rested his head back against the wall and closed his eyes as Tim switched on the hosed shower head and began to gently spray Jason down, scrubbing him with a soft sponge covered in sharp, spice-scented soap. The smell helped bring him back to himself a little, but not enough. He didn't want to anyway. He let Jason stay on the bench as he dried him and tended to his wounds, scrapes and cuts and bruises. The leg Jason had injured when they'd first been captured was throbbing now, albeit distantly. Jason lifted his head and opened his eyes, watched as Tim applied ointment and bandages, his eyes never leaving Tim's face. Not once did Tim raise his gaze to meet Jason's dull stare. He let Tim dress him in a clean set of clothes and bundle him into bed. Jason buried half his face into the pillow and shut the world out. The lights dimmed, and he heard the door click shut as Tim left the room. It wasn't until later that he would realize that Tim had been crying the whole time. Jason awoke several hours later to the sound of Fahad shuffling around the room. He was still a little foggy, but he was more present than he had been. "I thought it best to have a heavy meal prepared for you after last night's excursions," Fahad said when he noticed that Jason was awake. "You have just enough time to eat before it's time for your departure." That cut through the haze like the crack of a whip. "My what?" "Your departure? I assume you had been informed. A plane has been readied for your return to America. You are leaving in an hour." He's letting us go? Jason knew the answer before he asked. No. The flight is for you alone. Master Drake has opted to remain with Master Roz for the time being. Like hell! What was Tim thinking? I want to see him before I leave. Take me to him. Master Drake has explicitly instructed against that, I'm afraid. Fine, Jason snapped, throwing the blankets off and swinging his legs over the side of the bed. His bad ankle was wrapped. He hadn't even noticed him doing that last night. I'll find him myself. He stormed past Fahad, not even bothering to put a shirt or shoes on, ignoring the man's squawks of protest, and stalking out into the hallway, without regard for the throbbing in his leg. He didn't have time to care. You! He yelled at the first servant he saw. Where the fuck is my brother? Chapter 3. Jason fought his way past the guards at Roz's door. It was disturbingly easy. Though maybe one of the most skilled martial artists on the planet didn't need the most skilled bodyguards on the planet. It was probably meant to be decorative. Roz's ego was bigger than his common sense. Plus, Jason was pretty damn good, and to be fair to the guy, he'd kind of been kicking Jason's ass until Jason had kicked him in the balls and gone for his eyes. The highbrow fighters never seemed to expect the dirty moves for some reason. Jason wasn't opposed to biting when the situation called for it either. He threw open the double doors to Roz's chambers and froze at what he saw. Tim sat on the edge of Roz's huge bed, face tilted upward. Roz was standing between Tim's parted knees, Tim's chin pinched between his fingers. Tim's body was impossibly tense, but he was taking slow, deliberate breaths, centering himself. Both men turned to look at Jason as he stood gawking in the doorway. Tim's eyes were eerily blank. Holy shit, you just made this so much worse, Jason said, voice a little too high and hysterical. In a blink, he found himself across the room, faster than he thought he could move. An ache in his knuckles and a stunned Ra's al Ghul staring at him with a red mark already forming on his cheekbone. Oh fuck. Oh fuck, oh fuck, oh fuck. He just punched Ra's al fucking Ghul in the face. In another blink, he was on his back, the back of his head throbbing from having struck the floor, again, and a heavy weight on his chest. The point of Roz's knife was already cutting into Jason's throat. Tim was yelling, and Roz stilled his hand. Remember what I said, Roz. If you hurt him, our deal is off. Even for you, Timothy, I will not let this transgression stand, Roz said, his voice terrifyingly calm. Another month, Tim blurted hastily. Roz tilted his head in Tim's direction, his eyes never leaving Jason's face. I'll give you another month, Tim promised. That's 2 months with me at your command. Are you going to turn that away for a single punch? No one else saw it. You don't need to make an example of him. Please. Jason's eyes snapped to Tim. He wanted to speak, but the slightest movement of his throat would drive the blade in even deeper. It was in so deep now, he wasn't entirely sure if it hadn't already started to pierce his jugular. 2 months? Tim was promising to stay with Roz willingly for 2 months? It had only been a few days, and Roz had already started making moves, or whatever the hell he'd been doing, when Jason barged in. He felt sick. Saliva pooled in his mouth. He'd die if he moved his throat to swallow. 2 months, Roz pondered, twisting the knife back and forth, just the slightest bit. The pain made Jason's breath hitch, and he felt more blood pouring down his neck. Very well, he finally decided. 2 months, and I will spare his life. But I am not letting him go unpunished. Before either Tim or Jason could react, the knife left Jason's throat and was buried in his side. Jason held back a cry, biting his tongue so hard he could feel it pop, and blood filling his mouth, mixing with his spit. He couldn't give Roz the satisfaction of hearing him scream. Then Roz pulled the knife out, and Jason's defiance went out the window, as a scream tore from his throat. He inhaled all the bloody drool, and dry-heaved. Tim shoved Roz out of the way, and crashed to his knees to press both hands against the wound. You said you wouldn't kill him, he cried. Provided he manages to slow the bleeding. The wounds are perfectly non-lethal. Nothing major was punctured. Jason clumsily tried to push Tim's blood-slicked hands away. You asshole, he choked. You lied. I'm not leaving you behind with him. We don't have a choice, dumbass. If you stay, he's going to keep putting you in the fighting pits until you lose. And he'll do whatever he wants with me. but I'll be fighting him the whole time if that's how it goes, and he knows it. This way, you get to leave and I stay without a struggle. This is easier for everyone. It's not easier for you. I get to eventually leave this way. If you hadn't barged in like that, asshole, I would have been out of here in a month. Tim was right. Jason had fucked up. In more ways than one, since they got here. Sorry. Tim opened his mouth to speak, but Roz interrupted him. It's time for him to go, Timothy, he drawled. Are you going to let me stop the bleeding first? Tim snapped back. My people will stop the bleeding on the plane. That is the only first aid he will receive. You are both very lucky that I have decided to be lenient. I would do this for no one other than you, detective. Jason's vision was starting to tunnel now. Tim was saying something to him, but it sounded far away. Everything was going gray and blurry, and he felt himself being moved. Then there was an excruciating pressure on his side, and his body mercifully decided it was time to check out. The next time he became aware, he was being moved again. Waves of hot pain were pulsing in his side, and he couldn't stop the strangled sob that escaped his lips. He was dropped mercilessly to the rock-hard ground, and another scream ripped out of him. We have called your people, someone said. They should be here shortly. Lord Roz would have us remind you that if any one of you is seen near his palace, Master Drake will never be allowed to leave, and you will die. The words barely made sense to Jason's addled mind, but he knew that they were important, so he grabbed onto them as tightly as he could. He didn't know how long he was left alone on the hard ground in the dark, but he opened his eyes when he saw the light of a car through his lids. The Batmobile screeched to a halt, only a few feet away from him. Quick bootsteps, and then a familiar dark figure was kneeling next to him, blocking out the bright lights. Jason's eyes rolled around in his head as he tried to focus on Bruce's face. Bruce. Tim. He couldn't gather his thoughts enough to remember what he was trying to say. Hush, Jay. It's okay. We know what's going on. Just relax. We're taking you home. He let his muscles go lax. They knew. They knew about Tim, and that meant they could go get him. He stopped trying to keep his eyes open. He awoke in the cave to Cass sitting vigil next to him. Jay, she greeted tiredly when he cracked gummy eyes open. You're safe, she reassured him. Home. Tim, he croaked. Still with Roz, but Roz will not hurt him if he doesn't fight. We gotta... Cass, you don't know what... Cass pressed a single, gentle hand against his chest, like he was about to try and rise from the bed. You just got stabbed, brother. Tim is strong. Have faith in him. Worry about yourself. Worry about Tim when you're better. She reached over and adjusted something on the IV line he hadn't noticed hanging next to him, and then his body felt light and his eyelids too heavy. The next time he woke, he was alone. His wounds throbbed and pulled when he forced himself, clumsily and slowly, to his feet. He swayed dangerously, his vision graying in and out for a moment. He blinked it away and spotted a pair of crutches leaning against the wall, and staggered over to them. Using a single crutch, he made his way very slowly out of the medbay into where he spotted everyone huddled together at the Bat-computer. Dick, Cass, and Damian were all crowded around Bruce, studying something on the screen. As best as I can tell from what little we can track of the jet's trajectory, Barbara was saying over the satellite link on the computer. They were most likely heading to somewhere in Saudi Arabia. That doesn't narrow it down all that much, Dick said. Saudi Arabia is huge. Tim and Jay went off the radar for this mission, so we only know for sure that they were somewhere in the Middle East. I know my grandfather has a place in Iraq, Damian provided, but I'm not sure where. And that doesn't mean he does not also have one somewhere in Saudi Arabia. Dubai. Jason butted in. Everyone jumped, and 4 heads whirled on him. That's where we were when they picked us up. His voice was still rough and weak. We were blindfolded on the way to the compound, but we went by truck, and it didn't feel like we traveled far. No, Cass said, stepping up and supporting him by the elbow. Bed. Were you able to deduce which direction you were traveling? Bruce asked. No, they kicked my butt pretty hard, so I was too beat up to pay attention. I'm sure Tim was able to, but we didn't talk about it. Bruce frowned. Just another disappointment to add to his list. How long was the ride? 3, maybe 4 hours? There was a change in elevation. My ears popped. East, then. There are mountains on the west coast of United Arab Emirates, and in northern Oman. Oman is more remote. They're most likely somewhere in the Al-Hajar Mountains. Grandfather does have a penchant for mountains. Easier to hide. That's a lot of land to search, Dick said. But it narrows it down, Jason said. The throbbing in his side was getting worse, and he could feel the beads of sweat forming on his brow. It does, Bruce nodded. What did Roz's people tell you? Shit. His knees were starting to wobble. He needed to sit down, but he needed to find Tim more. That Tim was staying behind willingly, and that they were dropping you off at an airstrip, and that if we tried to come after Tim, we'd never see him again. Dick said in an acidic tone. That sums it up. Tim, agreed to 2 months with Roz in exchange for letting me go. His tongue was getting clumsy in his mouth. Enough, Cass snapped. Back to bed. You lost a lot of blood. You needed 3 transfusions. No, we need to find him. Roz's intentions with him are not good, Cass. I don't have time for rest. We need to get him back. Cass crossed her arms. For someone so short, she always managed to somehow give off the illusion that she was towering over Jason. Fine, I'll wait until you fall down. Then Dick and Bruce will carry you to bed. She looked at an imaginary watch on her wrist. I give you 5 minutes. Jason growled in exasperation. It came out raspy and not at all intimidating. Get me a goddamn chair, then. I can help. She's right, Jason, Dick said. You're not much help if you pass out. You need more rest. We're pretty good at this detective stuff. We can handle it while you sleep. Jason wanted to argue more, but he was focusing too hard on keeping himself upright. They may have had a point. He shifted 1 foot to take a step, and his knees buckled, the crutch falling aside. Cass rushed to catch him, tucking herself under his arm. Not even 5 minutes, she teased smugly. Bruce, how did you manage to pick only snarky ones? Jason grumbled faintly. It was an entire 2 days before the bastards stopped pumping Jason so full of pain meds that he was too out of it to get in the way. Once he was fully awake and coherent, he threw shit at the walls, whatever he could reach, including pillows, important medical equipment, and food. Sorry, Alfred. Until they finally gave in and let him hang out with them, in a wheelchair, so he could help. He was still foggy and slow on the drugs, but his stubbornness kept him awake. If any of us is spotted near the compound, Roz will go to ground and he'll take Tim with him, Dick was saying when Alfred wheeled Jason in. If that happens, that's it. We'll never be able to find them. He looked up at the sound of Jason's entrance and sighed. Hey, Jay. He may have already done that, Cass added to Dick's thoughts with a frown. Anxiety fluttered in Jason's stomach. We have to assume he hasn't. Tim didn't seem to think he would. Grandfather's arrogant, Damian agreed. If he is comfortable where he is, he will stay there. He doesn't think we're a threat. His hands were balled into fists. Something dawned on Jason. Roz will want to keep Tim near the fighting pits so he doesn't forget his threats. Fighting pits? Dick asks. Roz's creepy gladiator rings. He's using them to manipulate Tim. How was... Bruce. Jason cut Dick off. He didn't want to talk about it any more than that, and Bruce looked like he had something to say. We need someone who can get inside the compound without raising any suspicion, Bruce said. If Roz doesn't see anyone coming, he won't vanish before we get to Tim. Jason chewed on the inside of his cheek. Should he say anything? There's something we need to consider. 4 sets of eyes turned to him. Tim may not agree to come with us. Why? Cass asked. He stayed behind willingly, sort of. If Tim leaves, Roz has threatened to hunt me down. It may be simpler than that, Damian interjected. If we let Drake serve out his sentence. But, he added, I would not leave anyone at the mercy of Grandfather, not even him. We really can't, Jason insisted. Bruce studied him. You have every reason to be concerned, Jason. But there's something more. What aren't you telling us? Jason swallowed. He didn't want to tell them. Tim wouldn't want them to know. But they didn't understand the urgency here. Like I said, Roz's intentions with Tim aren't good. Obviously, Dick said. But what does that really mean? Jason, Cass urged. You're scaring us. Tell us. I walked in on them getting a little too cozy. Tim was not comfortable with the situation, but he wasn't stopping it. Bruce's face went stony. "Oh my god," Dick breathed. "Rescue, now." The more distressed Cass got, the fewer words she used. "I've been trying to tell you that," Jason hissed. "Be more specific next time," Damian spit. "We need to find someone who can get in unnoticed," Bruce said. "Quickly." "Tim has a league friend, Prudence?" Dick said. Cass shook her head. "Too obvious. Roz knows they're friends. Suspicious." "She's right," Bruce agreed. "But you're on the right track, Dick." It took them a long, long week to find a way to get a hold of the Prudence girl. Upon meeting her, Jason learned very quickly that her name did not suit her. He liked her immediately. "Why can't that boy keep his bloody nose clean?" "To be fair," Jason defended, if only to absolve himself. "It wasn't exactly our fault. It was literally a coincidence that Roz was at that party. So what do you expect me to do about it? I can't exactly show up and ask to take the birdie on a stroll. We were hoping you knew someone who could get in without raising any suspicion. Someone who could help us get in," Jason said. "Why do you think he needs any help? Kid could get his way out of a cement casket at the bottom of the ocean all by himself." "We're getting him out of there, whether he wants to come or not," Jason ground out. I get it. Red doesn't want to leave. So why exactly are you trying to bust him out, then? He's spent plenty of time with the old bastard before. He can handle himself." "Because he doesn't know what's good for him." Prue barks a laugh. "You're not wrong there. I don't like him being alone with Roz, anyway, that's for sure. Bastard's got grabby hands." "Thank you. Someone finally gets it. Alright, let me put out some feelers. I have some ideas." Prue came through in spades. Not only did she both locate Roz and Tim, and find them someone who could slip them into the compound relatively unnoticed, she also found Jason a way into the Lazarus pit chamber that was beneath the compound when he asked her in private. He almost talked himself out of asking twice before he pushed through the terror. He just had to keep thinking about the way Roz had tilted Tim's head back. Gently. Chapter 4. Jason counted 13 assassins protecting the Lazarus pit itself. They were ready and waiting by the time he and Cass made it to the inner chamber. It had taken them too long to break through the intense security guarding the entrance. Tim probably could have done it in seconds. Cass immediately took 3 out, with a few rapidly tossed knockout gas pellets, out of her belt and cracking against the stone in just a quick flick of her wrist. Jason took out 2, with a shuriken for each, down for the count when the blades hit home in places that they were each forced to keep hard pressure on or risk bleeding out, effectively taking them out of the fight non-lethally. Not easy to do with League assassins. Some of them could fight through almost any injury, especially any that Roz deemed good enough to protect a pit. It took almost all of Jason's concentration to hold himself back. He wanted to tear apart everything and everyone in this cave. He wanted to scream and rage and kill and hide. One of his greatest fears was bubbling away within arm's reach, pure evil oozing up through cracks and fissures in the coarse cave floor. Jason had been doing so well for so long now, but he couldn't tell if the green light flooding the room, reflecting off the moss-stained walls, was just from the pit or if it was from inside of him, too. It terrified him. He didn't know if he could handle a full relapse. Not anymore. Not after all this time. He'd been trying so hard. But if this is what set him back, it would be worth it. After their initial attack, 8 assassins were left. Jason could take them out more quickly if he used his guns, but they were in close quarters and he didn't want to risk hitting Cass or killing anyone with a ricochet. But he had healed well enough from his injuries for hand-to-hand to be just fine. He slid a dagger from its sheath as 2 assassins advanced on him. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of 3 of them circling Cass. The remaining 3 hung back, waiting for their chance. Jason didn't let either of his opponents get the first hit in. He went in low and swiped at a thigh. The targeted assassin blocked the hit with their own blade, but the move left them occupied, only just barely long enough for Jason to lunge and twist around behind them to catch them in the back. They were too fast to let a hit do much damage, but getting first blood rallied Jason, and he went right back in for another strike, without breaking stride. He got in 2 more hits, only one doing any significant damage. Not good enough to incapacitate, The second assassin came at his back while they thought the first was distracting him. He hadn't forgotten about them, keeping track of their position with his secondary senses, waiting for them to make their move. When the second assassin finally jumped in, the first followed them in a coordinated pincer move. Jason dodged, then kicked off of one of them, knocking them back and taking a shallow cut to his unmasked cheek from the other on his way. The kick was hard enough to throw Jason back and down just as hard, but he rolled out of the fall and popped back up. The assassin he'd knocked down did the same, but it put enough distance between them for each of them to regroup. Before Jason could make another move, there was a sharp pain in his back, right between his shoulder blades. He immediately ducked low and swiveled his head to look back. One of the assassins who had been hanging back in the shadows had taken the opportunity to fling something at him. A shuriken or a knife. He didn't have time to reach back and check. A few inches higher, and the blade would have hit him in the neck. He left it in for now, to keep the bleeding in check. He couldn't tell yet how deep the wound was. He didn't turn and defend himself, exposing his back to the two assassins he was already fighting. He didn't need to. The opportunist hit the ground hard as Cass finished her own fight and took them down. The second assassin closed in, and Jason finally managed to take them down with a boot to the knee. A hard enough hit that Jason heard the crack even over the sounds of fighting. They recovered quickly despite the severity of the injury, but not quick enough before Jason's boot connected with their head next. The first assassin leapt at him while he was taking the second out, and Jason got a nasty hit to the ribs, the swipe of a blade to the side of his head, and another, slightly deeper one, to the gut for it. But the assassins soon joined their comrade with a stab wound to the thigh and a very broken face. Jason flicked the assassin's blood off his knuckles and headed over to help Cass. Together, they took the remaining assassins down. By the end of the fight, Cass had taken only a couple of hits and she was barely out of breath. Once again, Jason was reminded of how much ass she kicked. Cass helped him patch up the wound on his back. It was a throwing knife, and the only thing that had stopped it from digging into his spine was the extra layer he had added to his armor only a few months ago, when Alfred had gotten a hold of his suit and fussed over it. Jason brushed Cass off when she tried to address the rest of his injuries. They had better things to worry about, like getting the fuck away from the Lazarus pit. Now that he couldn't help but put all his attention on it, Jason felt like its curse was starting to sink even deeper into his bones, tainting the air in the cave and seeping into his skin. He couldn't keep the image of hands creeping up and out of the rancid water and grabbing him by the ankles from flashing in his mind, dragging him back under, choking, drowning. He flinched when Cass's hand landed on his shoulder. "Ready?" she asked, searchingly. He knew she was seeing things in him he didn't want her to. Jason shoved the images away and nodded. He unstrapped one of his vambraces, extra protection on his left arm, for this occasion alone, tossing it aside along with his gloves, pushing up his sleeves, and held out his hand. The fresh tattoos on his arm glowed hot, tangling with the all-cast markings etched across his body, altering the ancient runes. They spread from his chest and snaked down his arm, pulling in his palm. They felt wrong, like an insistent itch in his soul. He'd been fighting the urge to scratch them bloody since he'd gotten them. They were sacrilegious. Dukra would skin him alive for the disrespect, cut them away along with the ones she'd entrusted him with, that she had inked into his skin with her own withered old hands. But, again, it was worth it. They would be irrelevant soon anyway. If Charon had been telling the truth, dead and powerless. All of them. Charon had been Jason's idea. Jason had gone to meet with him alone without telling anyone his plan. Everyone was pissed at him for that move. Even Damian. The fact that Charon had been able to touch his all-cast tattoos without being burned was fascinating to Jason. Even though he hardly had the time to think about it. It meant Charon wasn't pure evil, but probably only just by a hair. Diet evil. Jason grasped onto the tiny piece of hope that gave him that Charon's help might be legit. Might. Jason concentrated and reached, tugging at the tight ball of heat smoldering steadily in his core, to call forth the All-Blades, like he'd done so many times before. Except, instead of the familiar weight of a fiery blade in each hand, the power of both swords was caught and redirected through the new tattoos on his arm, their combined force running through the lifeline in his hand and converging into a single point at the center of his palm. He increased his concentration, and the markings grew hotter, searing scars into his flesh that would remain in the shape of them even after the tattoos faded. He set his jaw and ignored the pain. Gradually, a sphere of snarling flames grew in his hand, twisting and winding in on themselves to form an ethereal ball. Jason reached and reached and reached deep within himself and pulled at that heated core again, for all he was worth. Slowly, he could feel it begin to unravel as the sphere swelled larger. He was pulling it up and out of himself, like a spectral spool of thread, weaving it into something it wasn't meant to be. It was excruciating. It left an icy feeling behind in his chest, carving an empty void into the place it had been keeping warm for years. Distantly, he could feel Cass digging her fingers into his free arm anxiously. He didn't realize he had been squeezing his eyes shut until the sphere bulged to its limit, and he opened them wide. He couldn't help but stare. He was holding his own soul. Part of it, anyway. It didn't feel anything like when he held the blades. The All-Blades had been, a part of him, tethered to him in every way possible. The ball of flame danced in his hand was something completely separate now, excised from him like a vital organ. Dizzy, he swayed, and Cass held him steady. The cave spun around him, but he couldn't afford to falter now. This couldn't be for nothing. Sensing his moment of weakness, Cass led him forward, holding him upright and keeping his aim true. They approached the pit. Cass's arm around his shoulders was the only thing that kept Jason from shrinking back. He was too close. It was too close. He could feel the preternatural chill of it. A cold fog rolled off of it, smudging the air above it with an otherworldly haze. Somehow, despite the frigid temperature, the green water boiled, roiling and hissing. Cass reached around his back and took hold of the elbow on the arm holding the sphere, holding it steady. "You can do it. I'm sorry. It's too late to stop now." Cass had tried to talk him out of it when he had revealed his plan. He hadn't explained to everyone exactly what the ritual entailed. They knew he would be losing the All-Blades, but no one knew that they were connected to his soul, except Cass. The All-Cast was a well-known secret, but Cass was the one who was all. She knew. She couldn't stop him, and she knew it. So instead, she'd helped him into the depths of the earth, staying by his side while she watched him sacrifice a piece of himself. Cass noticed the change in him, the swelling of the last dredges of confidence, before Jason had the chance to brush her off, and she stepped back cautiously, hovering in case he fell. He locked his knees and steadied himself. The empty hole in his chest was starting to swallow him up, but Cass was right. It was too late to stop. Jason took one last step forward. The toes of his boots almost hung over the edge of the pit. Droplets splattered against Jason's boots as they popped out of the bubbling water. He took a breath and gently tossed the sphere into the pit. It dropped in without even a splash. As soon as the sphere left his hand, Jason teetered dangerously forward, like his body was trying to follow it. Cass hooked her fingers in the waistband of his pants and yanked him back. She looped her arms around his middle when he staggered backwards, and dragged him away from the pit, taking his weight easily, even though she was less than half his size. His vision fuzzed in and out, and his head lolled, suddenly too heavy for his neck. She dragged him a safe distance away and lowered him to sit on the stone floor. He was freezing all of the sudden, shivering so uncontrollably that his teeth chattered. Even through his graying vision, Jason could see the pit starting to seethe in earnest, fizzing and spitting violently. "Cast my spell into that foul concoction and spite the old bastard. It will purify the accursed crossroads where the tainted ley lines feeding the pool meet. Garon and Ghul will go watch the demon howl, won't we, Ghul? It will be so much fun." "It's happening," Jason said faintly. It was. The noxious green glow was dying out, the water slowly turning the black of a normal underground lake. And just like that, it stopped. The bubbles slowed and the surface went still, dark and glassy, leaving Jason and Cass in only shadows. There would be consequences, Charon had told them, for messing with the ley lines. He hadn't told them what, but Jason suspected it was the reason the witch boy had cooperated. Whatever the outcome, it would be something that excited a creature who thrived on chaos. Jason didn't care. All he cared about was getting Tim out of Roz's clutches. He just hoped the others were extracting Tim successfully, like they'd planned before Roz found out what Jason had done. He leaned his head back in relief and exhaustion, but then his body was leaning with it and he blacked out. Jason knew he was on the Batplane when he woke up, to the familiar sound of the smooth hum of its engines. He didn't know how long he laid there before he mustered up the energy to open his eyes. There wasn't much energy left in him to muster. He felt thoroughly wrung out, like someone had cut into him and plucked out all of his bones and drained out all of his blood, leaving him behind as a lump of limp flesh. He was still shivering, and he could feel the weight of several blankets piled over him. He couldn't be sure if they were actually helping. When he finally cracked his eyes open, it took just as long for his vision to translate to his brain anything that made sense. He was lying on a cot in the cabin of the plane. An IV line trailed from a bag hooked to the wall next to him, the cannula pinching the back of his hand. At first, he thought he was alone, until he caught sight of Tim curled up in the seat anchored to the wall at the end of the cot. He was balled up with his forehead resting against his raised knees, his arms looped around them in a tight hold. He had changed out of whatever Roz had probably kept him dressed in, and into the standard plain sweats and hoodie that were among the spare clothes kept in the plane. Jason inhaled sharply at the sight of him safe and whole. Tim raised his head at the sound and blinked at Jason. "What did you do?" Tim croaked. His voice was thick with exhaustion. "You okay?" Jason asked blearily, shamelessly breaking their rule. He sounded even more wrecked than Tim. Tim's brow raised in disbelief. Am I okay? Am I okay? Are you seriously asking me that right now? Tim, are you hurt? Tim curled tighter, squeezing his arms around his shins. He shoved his face into his knees and made an angry sound. "What is wrong with you?" he snapped, raising his head again to glare. "I was fine. I didn't need rescuing. Now you've destroyed one of the Lazarus pits. Jason, do you have any idea what Roz is going to do to you for that?" "He won't do anything," Jason insisted. He couldn't put much power into his voice, but it didn't stop him from trying. He took a concerningly rattling breath. That was the point. Now he knows that I can and will fuck him up for the rest of eternity if he tries any of his shit again. He's too much of a coward to retaliate. He talks big, but things are different with him when it comes to the pits. He'll beef up security around the others and go to ground. He was panting by the end of the tirade. God, he felt bad. You don't know that. He did. That was why he had done it this way. Roz won't come after any of them for taking Tim back. Not now. Not when he thought that Jason had the key to killing the pits. He wouldn't risk it. Not that Jason did anymore. Call him one-hit wonder Todd. Obviously, Roz would be pissed. Jason knew that. Probably more pissed than he'd ever been at anyone ever, even. But Jason knew he wouldn't risk another pit. He had to bank on that. If he was wrong, then he was wrong. Let Roz come after him. Let him try. Tim, it's okay. You're safe. We're going home. Tim's glare soured. I'm safe, he scoffed. Fuck you. We can't go home. Not yet. First, we're going to see Jason Blood so we can figure out just what the hell you've done to yourself. Your vitals have been all over the place, Jason. Your blood pressure is dangerously low. Your heart rate is low. And you have a heart murmur now. You were borderline hypothermic. You were critically dehydrated. Blood sugar was on the floor. CBC was horrible. Okay, I get it. He winced. Shit. That explained why he felt fucking horrible. I fucked myself up. Whatever. Got you out, though, didn't it? Tim straightened, put his feet down onto the floor, and then leaned back in his seat tiredly, scrubbing at his face. He didn't look so great himself. Jason wondered if he'd slept at all since he saw him last. It wasn't worth it. You might be dying, Jason. Cass told us what you really did. She told us how the All-Blades worked. That little snitch. Though he guessed if he was really dying, she had good reason to narc. But he wasn't. He was fine. Right? Charon had said it wouldn't kill him. Charon, the witch boy, Lord of Chaos, who would definitely never lie to anyone. Jason tried to sit up. He could barely raise his head. Just thinking about moving left him feeling winded. Am I? He asked, suddenly nervous. He really did sound terrible, weak and wheezy. Am I dying? Tim's face softened and he sighed. No, we don't know. Probably not. Jason Blood can help. He knows we're on the way. He's going to take a look. You'll be okay. Just go back to sleep. The next time Jason woke up, if whatever hazy liminal space he was in could be considered awake, he felt even worse. There were voices all around him, not bothering to be quiet even though he was trying to sleep. But he couldn't make out who they belonged to, or what they were saying. There was something on his face, covering his mouth and nose. It smelled weird, familiar, matches and plastic. He tried to reach up and take it off, but he could barely lift his arm. He groaned. It came out more as a rattle from his lungs. Everything hurt. His chest felt like someone was sitting on it, and he couldn't open his eyes to check. "Jay?" Someone touched his hair. "Can you hear me?" He grunted weakly. It was hard to drag the sounds up and out of his throat. They echoed weirdly into whatever was over his face. "Hey, bud, we're getting you some help. You're gonna be okay. Can you open your eyes?" It took effort, but he managed to pry them open. Not that it made much of a difference. Everything was too blurry to make out, and blinking didn't fix it. But it seemed to make the blobs standing all around him happy. He could hear the crackle of a fire in the room, and he realized for the first time that he felt a little warmer. That was something, at least. "Jason," an unfamiliar voice said in a lilting accent. Voice too deep to be Alfred. "If you can hear me, my name is Jason Blood. Your family brought you to my home to help you." Jason made a soft, confused noise. Help him with what? He just wanted to sleep. Why was everything so blurry? "Jason, you fucked yourself up so bad." "Tim," someone said sharply. "Leave it, please. At least until he's better." "Dick, his soul." "Your soul," the British voice interjected, "was bleeding, Jason. I was able to close the wound, but it will take some time to recover. Do you understand?" Jason hummed in lieu of trying to nod. "Jason. Jay." Jason knew that voice right away, even with his foggy awareness. "Bruce. Mr. Blood is letting us stay until you recover enough to travel. Just rest for now. We'll talk more when you're feeling a little better." He didn't have to tell Jason twice. He let his eyes fall closed in relief. Chapter 5. Epilogue. Jason's soul was permanently damaged. Of course it was. He ripped a piece out of it. He knew exactly what he was doing when he made his decision. What he didn't account for was the bleeding. Who even knew that could happen? Admittedly, he maybe should have done at least a little research other than just taking the word of a demonic troll. But, to be honest, he would have chickened out. He knew he would have, if he knew the real repercussions. So he deluded himself instead. The good news was, though the damage tearing the All Blades had done would never heal, the damage from the bleeding would. It took weeks to recover enough to even get out of bed, and even then, Alfred had made him stay on oxygen. He'd at least been allowed to graduate from the stifling mask he'd been wearing since he woke up at Jason Blood's to a cannula. Once he'd recovered from the actual hypothermia, the pervading cold still lingered. Jason wore layers even though it was early summer. Jason Blood said that would likely never go away. Just one of the consequences of soul damage. Along with that came a slew of other symptoms. Blunted empathy. Jason Blood's words, not his. Jason just called it being an even bigger asshole than before. Night terrors worse than ever, and the pit had a stronger grip on him now than it had in a long time. His effort to keep it in check had needed to be doubled. The sharp angles and looping curves from the tattoo that had wrapped around his arm were forever embedded into his skin as thick, knotted scars, ensuring he would never forget this experience. They still burned and itched like they were fresh, even though it had been weeks. Sometimes he woke up from one of his night terrors, clawing them bloody. He never remembered what the dreams were about on those particular nights. He always remembered the dreams of mud, though, thick and dark and foaming with blood and bile. Someone always had to come wake him up from those. The All-Blade tattoos were gone, completely. No sign that they were ever there in the first place. No proof that Jason had proven himself worthy of the Blades. No proof that he was the one and last surviving member of the All-Cast. He guessed he wasn't now. As for the ley lines, they still didn't know what the repercussions of cleansing them were. Bruce had every magic user he knew and then some looking into it. Zatanna had been pissed, but Constantine had been more amused that they'd fucked with Roz, so it couldn't be all that bad. Jason couldn't bring himself to regret any of it. "I didn't need your help." Tim accosted him almost as soon as he was out of bed. He'd come to visit a few times over the weeks. Jason was bedridden, but he'd been forbidden from laying into Jason like he wanted, so instead they'd played cards and board games in stony silence. The awkwardness still hadn't helped Tim from coming to see him, though. Jason had been wheeled into the sunroom and was reclining, mostly upright on the comfortable chase, which was only kind of a bed, so he took it as a win. When Tim had stalked into the room, strategically, as soon as Alfred had left, he loomed over Jason with his arms crossed. Jason sat up straighter, pulling the tubing from the cannula with him and adjusting the 2 blankets he had draped over himself. Maybe not. I don't care what you have to say about it. I wasn't going to leave you there for 2 months or however long Roz decided he wanted to keep you. Get over it. Okay, the blunted empathy thing was maybe going a little too strong here. He was still learning to navigate that. You'd think he'd have gotten enough practice, historically. Don't do that kind of stuff, Tim spit. Not for me. God, Jason. He pushed a hand into his own hair and tugged in frustration. You can't come back from this. It wasn't worth it. Tim had, Jason had been told, not come quietly. He had been determined to stay behind until they told him what Jason was doing. And even then, it hadn't been an easy sell. Tim had almost stayed with the intent to keep Roz calm after he'd learned what Jason and Cass were doing in the cave deep below their feet. But, in the end, his fear of the demon had won out. Jason didn't want to know what Roz might have done to him if Tim hadn't left when he had. Jason spoke without thinking. The idea of Tim doing whatever he could to keep an incensed Roz from going after Jason was carving itself into his brain. Keeping you from 60 nights of being raped was absolutely worth it, moron. The blood immediately drained from Tim's face, and Jason balked. Jesus Christ, he hadn't meant to say that. This was a really shitty way to handle a victim, and he knew that. He hadn't even meant to say anything, he just couldn't stop himself. All that anger and fear was still sitting too heavy in his gut, and he didn't care how it got out, until after he couldn't take it back. Tim. Stop, it's fine. I don't want to talk about it. I'm sorry. I don't want to talk about it, Jason. Just drop it. Jason blew out a calming breath. He wanted to ask. He wanted to ask so badly, but he clamped his mouth shut and swallowed his stupid, buck-wild tongue. Yeah, okay. Just, do you understand where I'm coming from here? Anything was worth getting you home, kid. Anything. It's just... Tim tilted his head back and squeezed his eyes shut. I'm sorry you got into this. Roz is supposed to be my problem. You don't even have anything to do with any of this, and now you... Jason snorted. The Ghouls have a tendency to make themselves everyone's problem. Besides, he nudged Tim's knee with a freezing, thickly socked foot, so he'd look at him. I got to destroy a Lazarus pit, Tim. If I could have ripped my whole soul to pieces and destroyed them all, I would have. Okay? Whether it had anything to do with you or not. Tim huffed and dropped down wearily by Jason's feet. He didn't look much better than he had when they'd first rescued him. The misplaced guilt was eating him alive, and Jason didn't know how to help. Hey, Jason tried. Did you know Cass has been working on the case that took us to Dubai in the first place? We missed our original window, but she still made some pretty good progress. If there was one thing that might make Tim feel better, or at least distract him from his own spiraling thoughts long enough for Jason to think of real ways to help, it was a case. Really? Tim asked, reluctantly interested. She didn't tell me. What did she find? Bingo. Let's go find her. Be my driver? He gestured at his wheelchair. He was still too weak to power it himself for longer than just back and forth to the bathroom and the kitchen. He'd taken a guest room on the bottom floor near the main facilities instead of his usual guest room until he was stronger. Alfred said he was making good progress. They had a physical therapist scheduled to come in a few days. He should be back up and around soon. And then, maybe, Tim could work out some of his anger by beating the shit out of Jason in training. Yeah, fine, but don't make this a regular thing. I'm not your chauffeur. Well, I was gonna suggest that you go get your skateboard and we make this a lot more fun. But suit yourself. Okay, maybe I can help sometimes. Jason grinned as Tim helped him up, and Tim rolled his eyes. Roz wasn't gone. Tim had been the one to land the final blows in the fight, and he wasn't dead. Of course he wasn't. But Tim had left him in bad shape. Jason hoped that it had taken him an agonizingly long time to get himself to another pit to fix the damage. Maybe fucking with the ley lines had healed all the pits. Wouldn't that be a dream? But Jason never got that lucky. Roz would be back. There was, for what it was worth, one good thing to come of all of this, though, as small as it might be. Damian, in an oddly sweet display, had snuck out from the fight while everyone was distracted and destroyed the fighting pits. Blown them sky high with as much C4 as a 14-year-old could stuff into his pants, which turned out to be a lot, and fuck if that didn't make Jason proud. Jason had only barely mentioned the fighting pits when he told his story. They had been a footnote. The others hadn't understood the gravity, but Damian must have known something. Jason wondered if he had been around to see Jason fight when he was still with the League. He would have only been 6 or 7. Jason didn't want to know, so he didn't ask. But hell, if he wasn't incredibly goddamn grateful. Damian was getting an expensive car for his next birthday, no matter what Bruce said about it. The idea that the fighting pits were gone made him feel lighter. He hadn't realized the weight of those memories had been pressing on him. He felt even lighter as he and Tim flew down one of the steeper slopes in the Batcave, the sound of Tim on a skateboard behind him, gripping onto the handles of Jason's wheelchair for dear life, and whooping with reluctant laughter from the adrenaline rush as they hurtled towards an inevitable crash, made him feel like he was made of feathers. Jason would do anything to make sure Tim was still alive, and whole enough to make that sound whenever he wanted. They all would. Let Roz come. Notes. Please be nice to me. Also, I wrote most of this back when I was primarily writing in past tense, and I've been writing in present tense these days. So if there are any points where the tense is off, no there aren't. This fic is completely written, so the updates will be frequent for once. Chapter 2 notes. Sorry if you were looking forward to the pit fight scene, but I felt like it would have been a little unnecessary. Not really anything special about 2 dudes trying to kill each other in some mud, but of course we all knew Jason was going to win. Also, definitely did not skip that bit because I'm terrible at writing fight scenes. There's a pretty intense fight scene later in the fic though. Don't worry. I worked so hard on it. Chapter 3 notes. Bit of a shorter chapter, but the next one will be longer. Notes. Cass is the goat. Notes. I hope I wrapped this up well enough. I like me some good trauma bonding. Especially platonic trauma bonding. All about that shit. If you enjoyed the story, go down to the description. I have a link to the author's original work, and a link to the author's account if you just want to look at other things they've written. If you liked my reading, you can subscribe if you want, or go down to the comments and let me know another fic I should do. I'll talk to the author and see if they're cool with it. Yeah. Thank you for listening. Hush, Jason. I can't do an old man voice, so it's just gonna be my voice, which is very funny given the context that it's Roz and he's a creepy old man. We're getting very somber with this one. I'm so sorry for mispronouncing everything.